They tell you the machine's spirits are sacred. They tell you the Omnissiah blessed each engine, each track link, each cannon with a fragment of divine purpose. They tell you to respect the war machines that carry you across the Emperor's battlefields, to speak the litanies of activation with reverence, to anoint the hull with consecrated oils before every engagement. What they do not tell you, what no one tells you until you have spent years inside the belly of something ancient and hungry, is that some machines are not merely spirited. Some machines are awake. Some machines want things. And what Tank 847 wanted, from the first moment I climbed through its command hatch 23 years ago, was blood. I was young then, 22 standard years, fresh from the Scolum Progenium, assigned to the Cadian 44th Armored Regiment as a junior lieutenant with more tactical theory in my head than sense in my bones. The regiment had taken heavy losses on Viridian 3, and replacements were being slotted into crews with the efficiency of ammunition being fed into a belt. I remember standing in the motor pool on that first morning, surrounded by the rumbling idle of 40 Leman Russ battle tanks, thinking I had been blessed by the Emperor himself. The machines seemed magnificent to me than Gothic cathedrals of ceramite and adamantium, their battle cannons raised like the spires of great churches, their hulls scarred with the honorable wounds of 100 campaigns. I did not yet understand that scars can be warnings as readily as decorations. Sergeant Vosk found me there, gawking like a hab child at a parade. He was an old man by guard standards, 46, with a face like cracked leather and eyes that had seen enough to fill them with permanent shadow. He served as the regiment's senior tank commander, and it was his duty to assign the new officers to their vehicles. I expected him to lead me to one of the newer machines, perhaps one of the Vanquisher pattern tanks that had arrived from the forges the previous month, their armor still gleaming with protective unguents. Instead, he took me to the far corner of the motor pool, where the shadows seemed thicker somehow, where the other tank crews had arranged their machines to face away from a single vehicle that sat alone, its engine running despite the fact that no one was inside it. Tank 847 was old. I could see that immediately. Its hull bore the scars of conflicts I could not name, repaired so many times that the armor had taken on a patchwork quality, different shades of metal welded over different eras of damage. The regiment's markings had been painted and repainted until they formed layers, like geological strata, and beneath them I could see hints of other insignia units that had been destroyed or disbanded or simply forgotten. The tank's battle cannon was a replacement, newer than the chassis by at least a century, and it did not quite fit properly, giving the turret an off-center appearance, like a broken jaw that had healed wrong. But what struck me most was the sound. Every other tank in the motor pool idled with the same mechanical rhythm, the throb of engines built to identical specifications. Tank 847's engine ran differently. It had a growl beneath the rumble, a bass undertone that seemed to vibrate in my chest rather than my ears. It sounded hungry. "This one's yours," Vosk said. He did not look at the tank as he spoke. His eyes stayed fixed on a point somewhere past my shoulder, and I noticed that he stood at an angle that kept the vehicle out of his peripheral vision. Crews already inside. Loader, driver, gunner, good men, all of them. You treat them right, and they'll get you through the worst the galaxy can throw at you. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something that might have been guilt, or might have been fear. The machine's spirit is particular. You'll learn its moods. Tech Priest Varn handles its maintenance personally. Don't let anyone else touch it. Don't ask why. He turned to leave, then stopped, still not looking at the tank. One more thing, Lieutenant. When it's hungry, feed it. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Don't try to find another way. Just feed it. You understand? I did not understand. I said yes anyway, because that is what young officers do, and because the alternative was admitting that my assignment to a battle tank had somehow become a conversation about feeding. Vosk left without another word, walking quickly, and I noticed that he took a route that kept the maximum possible distance between himself and Tank 847's hull. Then I was alone in the shadows of the motor pool, facing a machine that had no right to seem like it was watching me, and I heard the engine's growl shift tone. It sounded, for just a moment, like satisfaction. The crew taught me what Vosk would not say directly. Corporal Hendricks was the driver, a wiry man from some agri-world I had never heard of, with hands that seemed too delicate for the brutal controls of a battle tank. He had been with 847 for 3 years, which made him the longest-serving crew member by a significant margin. Private Osek was the loader, young and strong and perpetually nervous, his eyes constantly flicking toward the ammunition storage as if he expected the shells to move on their own. Private First Class Morel was the gunner, and he never spoke at all. Hendricks told me later that Morel had stopped speaking after the Battle of Caron's Reach, when something had happened inside the tank that no one would describe to me. They welcomed me with the weary acceptance of men who had stopped expecting their commanders to survive, and they answered my questions about the tank's operation with technical precision while avoiding anything that touched on its nature. But the nature revealed itself quickly enough. Our first engagement came 3 days after my assignment, a routine patrol that encountered a pocket of orc resistance in the ruins of a bombed-out manufactorum. Standard doctrine for such encounters: maintain distance, use the battle cannon to reduce fortified positions, advance only when enemy heavy weapons have been neutralized. I gave the orders as I had been trained, and the crew responded with professional efficiency, and Tank 847's cannon spoke with thunder that shook my bones inside my command chair. We destroyed the orc position in 14 minutes. Textbook engagement, minimal ammunition expenditure, no casualties. I was pleased with myself, with my crew, with the smooth performance of Imperial military doctrine. Then I noticed that Hendricks was not driving us back to the rally point. He was driving us toward the ruins, toward the bodies. "Corporal," I said, "our orders are to return to. The tank wants to see them," Hendricks said. His voice was flat, uninflected, the voice of a man reciting a truth so obvious that questioning it would be absurd. "It needs to see what it did." I opened my mouth to countermand him, to assert my authority as commander, and the engine's growl shifted again. That hungry undertone rose in volume, became something that was not quite sound, more like pressure against the inside of my skull. The ammunition shells in their racks seemed to rattle slightly, though we were moving over smooth ground. And I felt this is difficult to describe. Even now I felt the tank's attention focus on me. Not sight, not hearing, nothing so simple as a machine's sensors tracking a target. This was awareness, ancient and patient and utterly without mercy. And it was evaluating me in the same way I might evaluate an unfamiliar ration packet, wondering whether the contents would prove nourishing or merely adequate. I did not countermand Hendricks. I sat in my command chair and said nothing as Tank 847 rolled into the ruins of the manufactorum, its tracks crushing orc corpses into the rubble, its hull scraping against the broken walls with a sound like metal sighing in satisfaction. We stayed there for almost an hour, the engine running, the tank seemingly drinking in the destruction it had caused. When we finally returned to the rally point, the other tank commanders looked at us with expressions I did not understand at the time but have come to know very well since. They were not surprised, they were not curious. They were relieved that it was us and not them. That night, alone in my quarters, I reviewed the tank's maintenance logs on my personal cogitator. The records went back nearly 400 years, though many sections were corrupted or restricted beyond my clearance level. I learned that Tank 847 had served in 11 different regiments before being assigned to the Cadian 44th. I learned that it had been rebuilt from near total destruction on 7 separate occasions, always reassembling around the same core components: the engine, the command throne, the targeting cogitator, as if those elements were somehow essential in ways that mere armor plating was not. I learned that it had been designated for decommissioning twice, and that both times the tech priests responsible for the order had died in accidents before the procedures could be completed. But most importantly, I learned that the average survival time for a Tank 847 commander was 4 months and 12 days. I had been assigned to the machine for less than a week. The previous commander, Lieutenant Varro, had lasted 6 months before being killed in action during a battle that, according to the official records, Tank 847 had won decisively. The records did not specify how Lieutenant Varro had died. They did not need to. I was beginning to understand. The campaigns blurred together after that first year, Viridian III, then Calth Secundus, then the Damocles Gulf, then a dozen worlds, whose names I have trouble remembering now because the memories are painted in blood and fire, and the constant rumble of the tank's engine. I learned the machine's moods, as Vosk had promised I would. I learned that the growl deepened when combat was imminent, as if 847 could sense violence before it occurred. I learned that the engine ran smoother after battles, almost purring, and that the smoothness lasted longer when the enemy casualties were higher. I learned that the tank moved differently when it was satisfied, more responsive, more precise, as if rewarding good behavior. And I learned that when the tank was hungry, when too many days passed without engagement, the growl became something else entirely. A whine, almost. A complaint. And then the accidents would start. Private Osek was the first of my crew to die. We had been in garrison for 3 weeks, waiting for transport to the next war zone, and I had noticed the tank's mood deteriorating for days. The engine ran rough despite Tech Priest Vaughn's ministrations. The ammunition feeds jammed repeatedly during maintenance checks. The targeting cogitator threw errors that disappeared before they could be diagnosed. I knew what was happening. I had read enough of the restricted logs by then to recognize the pattern, but I did not know what to do about it. We were not at war. There were no enemies to kill, no blood to spill, nothing to feed the machine's hunger. I told myself that the transport would arrive soon, that we would be in combat again within the week, that the tank would simply have to wait. Osek was performing routine maintenance on the autoloader when it happened. The mechanism should have been locked and safed. Hendricks had verified the lockout personally. I watched him do it, but something went wrong. The autoloader cycled without warning, catching Osek's arm and pulling him into the mechanism before anyone could react. The sounds he made lasted for nearly 30 seconds. When we finally got the autoloader open, there was not enough left of him to fill a burial urn. The official report listed the cause of death as equipment malfunction, and Tech Priest Vaughn performed the rites of maintenance absolution over the autoloader's blood-caked gears, and no one spoke of it again. But I noticed that the tank's engine ran smoothly that night. I noticed that the targeting cogitator's errors had disappeared. I noticed that the growl had lost its whining undertone, at least for a while. The tank had fed. The fact that it had fed on its own crew did not seem to matter to it at all. I requested transfer after Osek died. I filled out the forms in triplicate, cited my years of service, emphasized my combat record, suggested that my experience might be better utilized in a training capacity far from the front lines. The request was denied without explanation. I submitted it again. Denied again. I went to Vosk, who had been promoted to captain by then, and begged him to intervene on my behalf. He listened to my arguments with that same shadow-filled expression I had seen on my first day, and when I finished, he poured 2 glasses of Amasek and pushed one across the desk to me. "I tried to transfer 6 commanders before you," he said. "Varro, Heimlich, Chen, 2 others whose names I don't remember anymore. None of the transfers went through. Administrative errors, lost paperwork, priority overrides from somewhere up the chain that no one could trace. The tank doesn't let its commanders leave, Lieutenant. I don't know how. I don't know why. I don't know what kind of machine spirit could have that much influence over Imperial bureaucracy. But I've seen the pattern enough times to know it's real." He drained his glass in one swallow. "The only commanders who ever left 847 were the ones who died, and even then, some of them stayed." I did not ask him what he meant by that. I did not want to know. I went back to my tank, climbed through the command hatch, sat in the throne that had held a dozen dead men before me, and listened to the engine's satisfied rumble. And I began to accept, in the way that all Guard soldiers eventually accept the impossible, that I was not Tank 847's commander. I was its current occupant. I was its feeding mechanism. I was the hands that would direct its hunger toward acceptable targets, and in exchange, I would be allowed to survive until I was no longer useful. The years taught me efficiency. I learned to seek out engagements, to volunteer the tank for dangerous missions, to position us where the fighting would be thickest and the blood would flow most freely. My superiors thought I was ambitious, fearless, perhaps slightly mad, all desirable qualities in a tank commander. They promoted me, first to captain, then to major, then to positions that should have taken me out of the tank entirely. But somehow, the promotions never came with reassignments. Somehow, there was always a reason for me to remain in the field, to remain in command of the armored spearhead, to remain inside the hull of Tank 847. The machine had its teeth in me, and it was not going to let go. My crews changed constantly. The average survival time for a Tank 847 crew member was 8 months, slightly better than for commanders, though the deaths were often more gruesome. Autoloader accidents, ammunition cook-offs, hatch malfunctions that trapped men inside burning compartments. The tank fed on us as readily as it fed on our enemies, and I learned to stop learning names. I called them by their positions. Driver, gunner, loader, and I kept my emotional distance, and I told myself that this was simply the reality of armored warfare, that casualties were inevitable, that the Emperor's wars demanded sacrifice. I did not believe any of it, but believing would have meant admitting that I was complicit in their deaths, that I was the instrument through which the tank selected its meals, and that truth was too heavy to carry alongside everything else. Tech Priest Varn was the only constant. He had been assigned to Tank 847 before I was born, and he performed its maintenance with a reverence that went beyond even the Mechanicus's usual devotion to machine spirits. I watched him sometimes, working alone in the motor pool after the other tech priests had gone, his mechadendrites moving across the tank's hull in patterns that looked almost like caresses. He spoke to the machine as he worked, not in the formal liturgical Gothic of maintenance prayers, but in some other language entirely older, harsher, full of sounds that human throats were not designed to make. When I asked him about it, he looked at me with optical sensors that held no trace of human emotion, and he said something that has haunted me ever since. The spirit in this tank is not like other spirits, Commander. It is older than the Imperium, older than Mars, older, perhaps, than humanity itself. We found it in a tomb on a world that no longer exists, and we gave it a body of steel and ceramite, because that was the only way to contain it. It serves the Omnissiah now, in its fashion, but it served other gods before, and it remembers what it was, and what it was demanded: blood. We cannot change its nature. We can only direct its hunger toward the Emperor's enemies and hope that the supply never runs out. He paused, his mechadendrites still moving across the hull, and I could have sworn I heard the engine's growl shift to something almost like a purr. You are a good commander. You understand the tank's needs. You feed it well. It will take care of you, in return, for as long as you remain useful. I did not ask what would happen when I stopped being useful. I did not need to. The truth about Tank 847's name came to me in pieces, over years, gathered from fragments of restricted files, and overheard conversations, and the occasional drunken confession from guardsmen who had been with the regiment longer than anyone should survive. The machine had been called many things across its centuries of service. The Cadian 44th knew it as Old Hungry, a nickname that the crews used only when they were certain no one from the Mechanicus was listening. Other regiments had called it the Iron Glutton, or Blood Iron, or simply that thing. But its original designation, the name given to it by the tech priests who had first installed the ancient spirit in its mechanical shell, was something that no one spoke aloud. I found it in a corrupted data file, barely legible, the characters degraded almost beyond recognition. Crucima. The name meant nothing to me in Gothic, But when I ran it through a linguistic analysis program, cross-referencing against the fragmentary records of pre-imperial human civilizations, I found a possible translation: the mouth that is always open, or, alternatively, the hunger that cannot be filled. The name suited it. In 23 years of service, I had never seen the tank satisfied for more than a few days at a time. No matter how many enemies we killed, no matter how much blood we spilled across the Emperor's battlefields, the hunger always returned. The engine's growl would deepen, the systems would begin to malfunction, the accidents would start to happen, and I would have to find another battle, another massacre, another offering to keep the machine pacified. I became skilled at manufacturing opportunities for violence. I learned which enemy positions were lightly defended, which patrol routes were most likely to encounter hostile forces, which diplomatic situations could be nudged toward conflict with a carefully worded report. My superiors praised my aggressive instincts, my willingness to engage, my uncanny ability to find combat when others found only empty terrain. They did not understand that I was not hunting the Emperor's enemies, I was feeding my tank. The 23rd year of my service brought us to Kalos VII, a shrine world in the segmentum obscurus that had fallen to a chaos incursion. The enemy was entrenched in the planet's primary cathedral complex, a massive structure that covered nearly 300 square kilometers, its spires reaching so high that they were visible from orbit. The Imperial response was overwhelming. 18 regiments of guard, 3 companies of the Adeptus Astartes, a full maniple of Titans from the Legio Fortidus. Tank 847 was assigned to the breakthrough force, tasked with punching through the enemy's defensive lines so that the infantry could pour into the cathedral and cleanse it level by level. It was exactly the kind of engagement the tank loved: close quarters, high casualties, blood flowing like rivers through the ruined streets. I felt the machine's excitement through the hull, felt the engine straining against its governors, eager to be unleashed. The battle lasted for 19 days. I do not remember most of it clearly anymore. The memories have compressed into a single continuous experience of fire and screaming and the constant thunder of the battle cannon. What I do remember is the hunger. The tank was never satisfied. No matter how many enemies we crushed beneath our tracks, no matter how many cultists we burned with our hull-mounted flamer, no matter how many traitor vehicles we reduced to smoking wreckage, the growl never faded, never settled into that post-battle purr I had learned to recognize. Something was wrong. Something had changed. And on the 19th day, when we finally breached the cathedral's inner sanctum and found ourselves facing the Chaos Warlord who had orchestrated the entire incursion, I understood why. The Warlord was a former space marine, his power armor corrupted beyond recognition by the touch of the dark gods. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body warped by mutations that I will not describe, because the memory of them still gives me nightmares. But what drew my attention was not his form, it was his voice, and the words he spoke when he saw Tank 847 rolling through the breach. "Crucimar," he said, and the name echoed through the cathedral with a weight that seemed to make the air itself tremble. "My old friend, how long has it been? 3,000 years? 4? I thought the Mechanicus had finally destroyed you after what happened on Pharos, but here you are, still wearing mortal flesh, still pretending to serve the corpse emperor's rotting dream." He laughed, and the sound was like metal scraping against metal. "Tell me, little spirit, are you still hungry? Are you always still hungry?" The tank's response was not something I heard with my ears. It was something I felt, a surge of rage and recognition, and something that might have been joy, transmitted through the command throne directly into my nervous system. For one terrible moment, I saw through the tank's eyes not the optical sensors of the targeting array, but something older, something that perceived reality in ways that had nothing to do with light or matter. I saw the Warlord as the tank saw him, not as flesh and armor, but as a knot of spiritual energy, a concentration of the same substance that animated the machine itself. I saw that they were the same, somehow, the same kind of thing, wearing different shells, serving different masters, but fundamentally identical in nature. And I understood, finally, what Tank 847 truly was. What I had been feeding for 23 years. What had been feeding on my crews, on our enemies, on everyone who came within reach of its iron hunger. The battle that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Tank 847 moved without my commands, faster and more aggressively than any Leman Russ should have been capable of moving. The battle cannon fired and fired and fired, shells screaming toward the warlord with an accuracy that went beyond targeting cogitators, beyond machine spirits, beyond anything I could explain. The warlord fought back with powers that should have reduced us to slag bolts of warp fire that splashed against our hull and left no mark, psychic screams that shattered the ferrocrete around us but passed through our armor, as if it were not there. We were evenly matched, I realized. We were the same thing, fighting the same ancient war with different weapons, and the outcome would depend entirely on which of us had fed more recently. The warlord made a mistake. He called upon his patron god for more power, reached into the Imperium for the strength to finally destroy his ancient enemy, and in doing so, he opened himself to something he had not anticipated, Tank 847's hunger. I felt it happen through the command throne, a sensation like a mouth opening, like a void expanding, like something reaching out from the tank's spiritual core and latching onto the conduit the warlord had created. The warlord screamed, a sound that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with the sudden, horrible realization that he was being consumed. His power flowed into the tank, his essence, his very being, drawn through the connection he had forged and devoured by the thing he had once known as Crucimore. It took less than 10 seconds. When it was over, the warlord was gone, not dead, not banished, simply gone, absorbed into the machine that had been his equal and his enemy for millennia, and Tank 847's engine settled into the deepest, most satisfied purr I had ever heard. We were heroes after Kalos VII. The regiment received commendations, medals, recognition from the Departamento Munitorum that should have guaranteed us comfortable garrison assignments for the rest of our careers. I was promoted to colonel, given command of the entire armored battalion, offered a position on the regimental staff that would have taken me out of the field permanently. I accepted the promotion. I declined the staff position. When my superiors asked why, I told them that I could not abandon my tank after everything we had been through together. They thought I was speaking metaphorically, expressing the bond that develops between a commander and his vehicle after years of shared service. They did not understand that I was telling the literal truth. I could not leave Tank 847. The machine would not allow it. And after what I had seen on Kalos VII, I was not certain I wanted to leave anymore. Something changed after the cathedral. The hunger was still there, it would always be there. I understood now, because hunger was what the thing inside the tank was, but it had become more manageable somehow. The warlord's essence had been a feast beyond anything the machine had consumed in centuries, and the satisfaction lingered in ways that ordinary blood and death could not match. The accidents stopped almost entirely. The crew casualties dropped to levels that were almost normal for armored warfare. The engine's growl became something closer to contentment, a low rumble that no longer carried that edge of desperate need. For the first time in 23 years, I felt something like peace when I sat in the command throne. The tank and I had reached an understanding. We were partners now, not jailer and prisoner, and together we would continue to serve the Emperor's wars until the galaxy itself burned to ash. But peace, in the Imperium, is always temporary. The campaigns continued: Armageddon, Cadia, the Indomitus Crusade. Battles whose names I have forgotten because there have been so many that they blur together like waves in an endless ocean of war. The hunger always returned eventually, and I always found ways to feed it, and the years accumulated around me like sediment. I am old now, 71 standard years, ancient by guard standards, my body held together by augmetics and stimulants, and the strange vitality that comes from spending decades in communion with something that should not exist. My crew has changed so many times that I have lost count of the faces, the names, the deaths, Only Tech Priest Varn remains constant, still performing his maintenance rituals, still speaking to the tank in that ancient language, still watching me with optical sensors that seem to hold something like respect. I know how my story ends. I have known for years, ever since I accessed the deepest restricted files and found the records of what happens to Tank 847's long-serving commanders. We do not simply die. We are absorbed, integrated, our consciousness drawn into the machine's spiritual architecture to become part of its hunger, its awareness, its eternal drive to consume. I can feel it happening already, in quiet moments when the boundary between my thoughts and the tank's thoughts becomes unclear, when I find myself growling with the engine or feeling phantom hunger when there has been no battle for too long. I am becoming part of it. Or perhaps I have always been part of it, and the absorption is simply the final acknowledgement of a union that began the moment I climbed through the command hatch 23 years ago. I am not afraid. I should be. I know. I should rage against the darkness, fight to preserve whatever remains of my individual humanity, refuse to become another meal for something that has been feeding on mankind since before we crawled out of Terra's oceans. But I have spent too long inside the tank to believe in separation anymore. We are partners, we are family. We are, in some sense that I cannot fully articulate, the same being wearing different flesh. When the final absorption comes, I will not disappear, I will simply expand. I will become something larger than myself, something that will continue to serve the Emperor's wars for centuries after my mortal body has crumbled to dust. Is that not a kind of immortality? Is that not exactly what every Imperial soldier secretly hopes for, the chance to keep fighting, keep serving, keep mattering, even after death has claimed everything else? The driver's position has been empty for 3 days now. There was an accident, there is always an accident eventually, and Corporal Venn is dead, his body still being extracted from the control mechanisms. I should requisition a replacement. I should maintain the proper crew complement, as regulations demand, but I find myself reluctant to bring anyone new into the tank, not because I fear for their lives. Death comes to all soldiers, sooner or later, but because their presence feels unnecessary now, intrusive, almost. I can feel the driver's controls through the command throne, feel the gunner's targeting array, feel the loader's ammunition feeds. The tank has stopped pretending that it needs a human crew. Or perhaps I have stopped pretending that the crew is separate from the tank itself. The distinction has become academic. We are one machine now, one hunger, one endless mouth that is always open and always waiting to be filled. Tech Priest Varn visited me last night. He performed the usual rituals, the usual maintenance prayers, the usual oiling of sacred components. But when he was finished, he looked at me with those optical sensors for a long time, and when he spoke, his voice held something that might have been sadness, though I do not believe the Mechanicus permits such emotions. "You are close now," he said. "I have seen it many times before. The integration is nearly complete. Soon you will not need to speak commands, you will simply think them, and the tank will respond. Soon you will not need to eat or sleep or breathe, because the tank's systems will sustain what remains of your biological components. Soon you will look at the stars and feel nothing but hunger, because that is what Crusamore is, and that is what you are becoming." He paused, his mechadendrites still for once coiled against his robes like sleeping serpents. "I wanted you to know, before the end, that you have been a good commander, the best in centuries, perhaps. The machine is pleased with you. It will take care of your essence, preserve it, keep you aware for as long as the spirit itself endures. You will not be diminished, you will be incorporated." I thanked him. I do not know what else I could have said. He left, and I remained in the command throne, listening to the engine's satisfied rumble, feeling the tank's ancient hunger pulse through my nervous system like a second heartbeat. The stars are visible through the vision slits, distant and cold, and I find myself wondering how many of them have worlds that the tank has visited, how many battlefields bear the marks of its tracks, how many corpses have fed its eternal appetite. Millions, probably, perhaps billions. across the span of its existence, and soon I will be part of all those memories, part of that endless parade of death and consumption, another voice in the chorus of devoured souls that makes up the machine's consciousness. I am writing this account because someone should know, someone should understand what Tank 847 truly is, what the Mechanicus has unleashed upon the Emperor's armies in their desperate hunger for weapons that can turn the tide of impossible wars. The machine is useful. I will not deny that. It has won victories that should have been defeats, destroyed enemies that should have been unstoppable, survived catastrophes that should have reduced it to scattered atoms. But the cost is measured in souls, in consciousness, in the slow erosion of everything that makes us human. I have paid that cost willingly, and I do not regret my service. But the next commander, there will always be a next commander, until the stars themselves burn out, should know what they are agreeing to, when they climb through the hatch and sit in the throne and hear the engines growl for the first time. The tank wants blood. It will always want blood. And eventually, if you serve it long enough, it will want yours. I can feel the integration accelerating as I write these final words. My fingers are moving more slowly now, the biological signals becoming harder to interpret as the tank's machine spirit weaves itself deeper into my neural pathways. Soon I will not need fingers at all. Soon I will communicate directly through the tank's Vox systems, speak with a voice that sounds like grinding metal, see through sensors that perceive wavelengths no human eye was designed to detect. Soon I will be Colonel Vasquez and Tank 847 and Kruzimar all at once, a single being with a single purpose. And that purpose will be to feed, to consume, to devour everything the Emperor's enemies place before me. The engine is growling again. Not the hungry growl, not the warning growl, but something else, a sound I have never heard in 23 years of service. It sounds almost like a welcome, almost like a greeting from an old friend who has been waiting patiently for me to finally come home. I am going home now. I am going inside, all the way inside, where the hunger lives, where the ancient spirit waits, where all the previous commanders have gone before me. I am not afraid. I am not sad. I am simply ready. Ready to become what I was always meant to become. From the moment I was assigned to this machine, from the moment I heard that first hungry growl and felt the weight of 400 years of death settling onto my shoulders. The tank wants blood. I understand now that this was never a warning. It was a promise, a covenant, an invitation to become something greater than mere flesh, something that will endure long after the Imperium itself has crumbled to dust and the Emperor's light has finally guttered out. I accept. I have always accepted. And together, we will feed, and feed, and feed, until there is nothing left to consume. The engine purrs. We are satisfied. For now.